Number 10. Igor Lannis. Shortly after the 2020 US presidential election, Igor Lannis became immersed in conspiracy theories. His daughter Rebecca would later tell the Detroit News that her father was wholeheartedly convinced that the election was rigged. She explained that he dove down a rabbit hole of paranoid beliefs about vaccines, 5G technology, QAnon, and an alleged deep state of secret institutions that he believed were merely disguising the country as a democracy. According to Rebecca, the 53-year-old Oakland County, Michigan resident became so hard-set in his views that nobody could get him to even consider looking at things differently. His bizarre descent into a mindset of constant mistrust and irrational skepticism came to an end in 2022 when his other daughter, Rachel, called the police and reported that her father had shot her. Igor answered the door with a gun in his hand and immediately began shooting at officers, who fired back and killed him. Rachel survived, but her mother, 56-year-old Tina Lannis, and the family dog were both found dead from multiple gunshot wounds. Rebecca, who wasn't home at the time of the shooting, blamed her father's obsession with conspiracy theories, particularly QAnon, for the deadly fit of rage that killed her family. Igor had gotten into a heated argument with his wife and daughter, who were about to leave the property, when he resorted to gunfire. Authorities are still investigating the disturbing tragedy and have not revealed what the argument was about, although it's suspected that the disagreement could have had something to do with Igor's extreme beliefs. 9. Lisa Dawn Oliver. After receiving reports of a stabbing one evening in October of 2022, police in Rosemount, Minnesota arrived at a man's home to find him bleeding profusely from a 2.5-inch neck wound. Officers applied pressure to the injury while the victim explained that the mother of his child had attacked him in a fit of rage. He said that 44-year-old Lisa Dawn Oliver had dropped their daughter off at his house about an hour earlier. However, soon after, the young girl began to ask if she could return to her mother's home. The victim, who had full custody of the child, initially opposed letting her go back over, but decided he would allow it. He further explained that when Oliver entered his residence, he told her he was fine with their daughter spending the night with her, but not to expect it to become a regular occurrence. Oliver allegedly left the house, but returned after a few moments and assaulted the man. He said he felt something drag across his neck, and then immediately noticed that blood was gushing from the wound. Neighbors who overheard the former couple's argument said they overheard Oliver threatening to kill the victim. Oliver's roommate reportedly told the police that she admitted to stabbing her ex and said she was hiding in a field. When authorities found her, she was charged with attempted murder and is currently being held on $500,000 bail while she awaits the next steps in her case. Number 8. Brian Taylor. The usually uneventful rural town of Jordan, Pennsylvania was left shaken after a local resident went on a deadly shooting spree in November of 2022. It all started when 54-year-old Brian Taylor fatally shot his wife, 60-year-old Linda, during a domestic dispute. He then drove to the home of his sister, 52-year-old Andrea Meek, shooting at another car along the way. Once he arrived at the house, he shot and killed Meek. From there, Taylor headed to another residence and fatally shot an acquaintance, 55-year-old Jerry Zering. He also fired at multiple homes and cars as the crime spree continued, and shot at state troopers when they arrived at the scene. The authorities returned fire, and Taylor died in the shootout. Residents in the sparsely populated town of 850 declined to speak with reporters from Penn Live, who reached out for comments. Authorities refused to reveal the exact circumstances that caused Taylor to spiral out of control during the domestic dispute with his wife. According to the most recent update, the tragic triple homicide was still under investigation. Number 7. Spencer Hite. After a night of heavy drinking in Plano, Texas in 2017, 32-year-old Spencer Hite stumbled out of the bar and was followed by at least one staff member who expressed concern over his mental state as well as his ability to drive. The employee tried convincing Hite not to get behind the wheel and told him he should hand over his weapons until he sobered up, but the man refused. At one point, Hite fell and the staff member caught him and helped him to his feet. He continued to insist on leaving, and nobody stopped him from getting into his car, despite his heavily inebriated state. Hite drove to his ex-wife Meredith's home just a few blocks away and opened fire on a group of people who had gathered there to watch a football game. By the time police arrived, Hite had already shot 9 people, leaving 8 victims dead and 1 seriously wounded. He fired at the responding officers, who fatally shot him in self-defense. Authorities concluded that he committed the massacre to get revenge on his ex for divorcing him. After discovering that his blood alcohol content was 4 times the legal limit, they charged the bartender who served them that night, Lindsay Glass, with violating a law prohibiting the sale of alcohol to people who are clearly intoxicated or insane. Her attorney, Scott Palmer, told the Washington Post that Glass may have served Hite, but she also tried to convince him not to drive, followed him to his ex-wife's home, and ultimately dialed 911 to report her concerns. Hite's father, Chester, told CBS News that his son struggled with a drinking problem. Meredith's mother, Debbie Lane, said that Spencer retreated into a room alone with his computer whenever his in-laws visited. He eventually lost his job, leaving the mortgage payment squarely on Meredith's shoulders, and was allegedly violent towards her on more than one occasion before the divorce was filed. And while authorities have speculated that the tragic shooting may not have happened if Hite wasn't so drunk, it sounds like his anger was building for a long time leading up to the horrific crime. Number 6. Finlay McDonald. One morning in August of 2022, an armed madman stabbed 32-year-old mother of 4, Rowena McDonald, on northwest Scotland's Isle of Skye. She survived the attack, but suffered injuries. The perpetrator then fatally shot 47-year-old John McKinnon before proceeding to the mainland, where he injured 63-year-olds John and Faye McKenzie. Suspicion soon fell on 39-year-old Finlay McDonald, victim Rowena McDonald's husband and the father of her 4 children. He's also believed to be the brother-in-law of John McKinnon, the victim who was shot dead. Police charged McDonald with 1 count of murder, 3 counts of attempted murder, and numerous other crimes, including permanent disfigurement and assault with severe injury. Authorities have not disclosed a possible motive or many other details surrounding the case. It doesn't seem as though McDonald has entered a plea, and for the time being, he remains in custody. Reverend Gordon Matheson told the BBC that the tight-knit Skye community is traumatized from the incident, especially since everyone who lives on the island knows each other and is connected to the victims' families in some way. Number 5. Alyssa Leanne Arreola. A woman stole a vehicle from a Sam's Club parking lot in Kansas City on the morning of October 27, 2022. In what turned out to be an interstate crime spree, she committed 2 hit-and-run crashes over the next several hours. Witnesses blocked her in at the scene of the second accident, at which point she exited the vehicle and fled on foot. She then entered the home of a 79-year-old woman and allegedly said that someone was after her. When the resident suggested calling the police, the perpetrator knocked her to the floor and stabbed her with a kitchen knife. According to court documents, the suspect proceeded to trespass into the home of Isidoro Garcia Jimenez, where she changed out of her bloody clothing and stole 3 guns. When Garcia Jimenez arrived at the house, he was shot dead, and his killer then stole his car. The ordeal lasted for hours and ended when police found 22-year-old Alyssa Leanne Arreola sitting in an employee's car outside a school in Kansas City, Missouri. Police Sergeant Bobby King chased her on foot into a nearby gas station, where she allegedly bit him twice. Thankfully, a good Samaritan helped King take Arreola into custody. She's accused of being responsible for the destructive string of crimes and faces over 12 charges, including murder, attempted murder, aggravated robbery, aggravated burglary, auto theft, and gun theft. Number 4. John Joseph Thomas Green. One day in November of 2022, a young man entered Salt Lake International Airport and tried to buy a same-day plane ticket to Denver. When he was unable to, he allegedly became combative, and employees called the police. Before officers arrived, the suspect carjacked a vehicle in the parking lot and fled the scene. According to an arrest report, the man purposely crashed the car into 2 other vehicles, including an SUV, that he also attempted to carjack. The driver fought back, so the suspect returned to the car he originally stole and drove away. He then rammed into a building, stole another vehicle at gunpoint, and continued on his rampage, causing at least 5 crashes by the time the police caught up with him. Luckily, nobody was injured in all the chaos. Officers arrested 20-year-old John Joseph Thomas Green in connection with the bizarre carjacking spree and charged him with multiple felonies. However, before taking him to jail, they dropped him off at a hospital for behavioral observation. According to the most recent update, investigators were still trying to establish a motive and attempting to figure out if drugs or alcohol were a factor in the suspect's alleged behavior. Number 3. Brian Keith Schmidt. During his drive home from work one day in 2019, Atlanta-based attorney Brian Keith Schmidt felt a small object smack into his car. There are varying stories about what happened next. Schmidt claimed that he'd noticed a man named Hamid Jahangard bouncing a golf ball at the end of his driveway. He said he then turned around to ask the man if he'd hit his car with the ball. The men briefly exchanged heated words before Schmidt made a hard turn into Jahangard's driveway and struck him with the vehicle. 60-year-old Jahangard suffered from multiple skull fractures and died 2 days later from his injuries. Immediately after crashing into Jahangard, Schmidt got out of his vehicle and administered first aid. He gave responders conflicting stories, initially claiming that the victim jumped out in front of his vehicle. However, authorities charged Schmidt with murder and aggravated assault. They didn't believe Schmidt's claims that he underestimated his vehicle's turning radius and hit the victim by accident, or that he was trying to resolve the misunderstanding in a peaceful way. Prosecutors accused him of acting deliberately and out of anger. The incident was captured on surveillance footage, which the jury used to help them reach a verdict, along with a copy of the written statement Schmidt gave the police on the day of Jahangard's death. They found Schmidt guilty of murder and aggravated assault, and he was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole. His earliest chance of regaining his freedom won't come until he's 81 years old. Number 2. Daniel Ferry. One morning in 2020, Carrie McFadden and her boyfriend Barry McGinley were fast asleep at their home in the Irish town of Falcarry when her ex-boyfriend Daniel Ferry broke in. He brutally attacked McGinley, leaving him covered with injuries, and then bragged about it on Snapchat with a photo of the victim. McGinley's teeth were chipped and his nose was broken, requiring reconstructive surgery. McFadden told the police that Ferry broke up with her after they'd been dating for 6 years, and that there were no hard feelings between them as far as she knew. His behavior became troubling shortly before the incident, when he began contacting McFadden incessantly and showed up uninvited in her driveway. He even appeared at a concert that she and McGinley attended and stood right behind them the entire time. During her victim impact statement, McFadden described how her home was a bloodbath in the aftermath of the crime, requiring her to buy new furniture and hire professional cleaners. She was so traumatized by the ordeal that she left the country to start a new life elsewhere, seeing as it was her only way to truly feel safe from her ex. A judge sentenced Ferry to 5 years in prison, but gave him the opportunity to avoid any time behind bars, so long as he compensates his victims to the tune of $10,045. Number 1. Carla Cooperthwait. Most people don't like being stared at, but one British woman's reaction to a man's unwelcome gaze in 2019 was so extreme that it landed her in police custody. It all started when 22-year-old Carla Cooperthwait allegedly got drunk and chased after a man with a steak knife because she didn't like the way he looked at her. She was accused of following the victim to a convenience store in Manchester, England, where he hid inside with the door locked while she tried breaking in. During that time, police found out that Cooperthwait turned her rage towards another man who simply happened to be walking by. She supposedly shoved him to the ground and berated him while angrily foaming at the mouth. Thankfully, nobody was injured. Cooperthwait admitted that she was drinking heavily at the time and was sentenced to 16 months in jail. However, she wound up back in court in 2021 for spitting at police officers during a disturbance call. She was consequently ordered to wear an ankle monitoring device and was forced to attend rehab for alcohol addiction. Would you rather have a loud neighbor who's prone to explosive tantrums at all hours, or a quiet neighbor who always walks around with no clothes on? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed today's video, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye!